Now that you understand that your mind is your most powerful tool and you're taking whatever the computer is giving you, whatever kind of output or a lack of output, whatever that symptom is, whether it's an error message or it's something a lot more vague, now that you understand that we're starting here, how do you proceed? Where do you go from there? How do you start to troubleshoot that issue? Well, take whatever the computer's giving you, and then after that, you have to make the first jump back toward the system. So the computer has given you some output. Now you're taking that and you're processing it in your mind, and you've got to make what I'm going to call the first step back toward the system. So how do you take that first step? Okay, how do you do that? You're going to take whatever the computer's giving you, and you're going to stop for a moment, write it down if you need to, or else you can do all of this in your head, and begin to think about what is involved in the error. So I'm going to talk about 3 errors as an example in this module. In the first error, you go to your computer server in your office complex. You have a monitor hooked up to it. You can also access it via SSH, but you also have a monitor hooked up, and there are certain things that you check on every day. You flip on the monitor and you see garbled output. Looks kind of like artifacts on the screen. It just doesn't look right. It looks all like gibberish, a bunch of blocks maybe. Okay, that's one type of error or output from the computer. That'll be our first scenario. In our second scenario, your computer is unable to reach the internet. It's available on the local network, but it can't seem to get outside of the local network to access the internet. So you're getting error messages when you attempt to ping the outside world or visit web pages or do anything that requires the internet. So you're getting an error message in that case. And our third problem that we'll be looking at as an example is that the computer server seems to be shutting down. It seems to be at random. Okay, so you've got these 3 errors here. You have first, garbled output on the monitor. Second, unable to access the internet, but it's available on the local network. And third, a machine, a server that is powering down, seems to be for no reason. So as a way of example here, let me take the output from each of these 3 scenarios and show you how I process it and how I take the first step. Write that down if you're taking notes. Taking the first step. You've received output from the computer. Now take the first step. How are we going to do that? Okay. First case, you've got garbled output on the computer screen. What's the first step? The first step back to the computer is the monitor. That's the closest thing to you. It stands between you and the server. You see that? So we're trying to get to the server, but we don't go directly to the server. That might be our first step. Okay, it's not our first step in every case. In this case, the error has come to you from the monitor itself. Okay, so we have to bring the monitor's integrity into question. So your first step in that case is the monitor, and that would mean that you would then need a couple of things you could do. You'd probably need to either go and get another monitor, a known to be working monitor, and swap it out with that other monitor to see if you're getting the same output or different output. If you get different clean output, then you can say it's very possible that this monitor is going bad. Hook that monitor up to another system, a known to be good, a known working system, and you can begin to see if that monitor is the problem. But that monitor is going to be your first step. Now, what would be your second step after the monitor? Let's say you hook up another monitor and you're getting the exact same output. Great. Okay. So that tells us something. We're going to move past the monitor, and now we're going to say, what's our next step? Well, think about it. You've got a monitor which is running with a cable where? Don't just think to the server. It's running specifically to the graphics card or the graphics chip, the graphics port, the VGA port, DVI port, whatever it is, HDMI port on the back of that server. And again, it may be a discrete standalone card, or it may be one that's embedded within the motherboard, but an onboard chip that's there on the motherboard. But either way, your next step is not just to the server in general, but it's going to be through that cable. We've ruled out the monitor. Now we're going to move to that port itself. So how do you troubleshoot that? Are you getting the idea here? Let me walk you a little bit further through this. Okay, so you know that the output from the server is garbled, and it's garbled on more than just one monitor. So that's telling you that the monitor's not bad. It's got to be that next step after that. So your second step is going to be to the port. Okay, go ahead and open up that server. Check that port out. Do you have another port on that machine? If you have a discrete graphics card, begin to think, okay, I have a discrete graphics card. Do you have an onboard embedded video solution as well? Could I remove that discrete card and plug the monitor in to the onboard set? Maybe something's wrong with the card, the graphics card. Okay, if you don't have an onboard, graphics chip, graphics processor, then you can take the card out and find another card to put in its place and try that. So that card, that's your next step back to the system. Now, if you put in another card and you're still getting garbled output, or you use the onboard graphics chip and you're still getting garbled output, what's going to be your next step? Well, my next step is going to be the motherboard. And at that point, I'm going to think that something is likely seriously wrong from a hardware perspective with this computer. Okay? We can move on from there and we'll continue taking steps. But I want to get on in the next few modules here. I want to keep talking about this. I want to move on to the second and the third scenario. So we'll wrap up this module where we covered the first scenario with garbled output. And I use that as an example because it's very clear to see the steps that you're taking. Okay, so you're writing down or you're just taking note of whatever the computer's giving you, and then you're taking the first step. What is the first step toward the computer? If you're still struggling with that concept, we're going to talk more about it in our second scenario in the next module about a network error.